Hello, Solomon here. This is the third video that continues my breakdown series on T1 Frigate fits for low-sec and faction warfare solo PvP. It's been a few months since my previous video on the blaster Atron. If you watched it, I hope you have managed to have some fun with it. I've discovered an equally fun ship and fit for this next breakdown. In this video I'm flying a dual-web armour-tanked Kestrel, and with a little luck I'll demonstrate its features and capabilities and show you how I fly it. With this fit, I beat my own personal record of consecutive solo kills. My aim in this series of videos is to find fits that don't take too much thought. A good skill base and knowledge of what you're up against and how to fight it is of course required, but I'm a terrible manual pilot and rely on the orbit, approach and keep at range commands to do the piloting work. Let's take a quick look at the Kestrel bonuses before we get to the fit. A 5% bonus to light missile and rocket damage and a 10% bonus to light missile and rocket max velocity. This 10% bonus to rocket velocity effectively increases the range of our rockets. The range of a rocket is determined by its velocity and maximum flight time. On to the fit. In the high slots we have 4 Tech 2 rocket launchers. In the lows, a 400mm rolled tungsten compact plate to boost armour strength and a ballistic control system 2 giving a bonus to rocket damage and rate of fire. In the mid slots, an afterburner, scram and 2 webs, all Tech 2. The Tech 2 afterburner allows us to get as much speed out of the fit as possible. The Kestrel is one of the slowest frigates in the game, and that, combined with my armour plate, which increases ship's mass and therefore affects speed and manoeuvrability, makes this a slow ship. This is where the Tech 2 dual webs come into play. A single Tech 2 web reduces your target ship speed by 60%. Having 2 of these applied to your target will have a severe effect on its speed and will, in most cases, allow you to dictate range. The Tech 2 Warp Scrambler allows for maximum scram range and is particularly useful when kiting blaster ships at 9 to 10 kilometers, negating a lot of blaster damage. For the rigs, I fitted a small bay loading accelerator which increases the rocket launcher's rate of fire and thus our DPS, and 2 small Trimark armour pumps to further enhance the ship's armour tank. This is a tight fit and requires a +3 power grid implant to online all the mods. Looking at the fit in EFT, we will see that even with all level 5 skills, we come up short on power grid. Okay, let's talk a little about rockets and damage application. I found them a little strange to use at the beginning, after being so used to blasters and railguns. All rockets come in 4 variants: Mjolnir, Inferno, Scourge and Nova. Each variant deals a particular type of damage: EM, thermal, kinetic or explosive. This is useful to know, as you will be choosing a different variant depending on the ship you're engaging. Rockets cannot miss their target, so long as your target is within range, so they will always hit and will always do some damage. The range of a rocket is determined by its speed and maximum flight time, and there are skills you can train to increase these. The amount of damage they apply is determined by the explosion radius or size of the explosion, and the explosion velocity or speed of the explosion. In other words, it is the size and speed of the explosion that determines the damage, not the speed of the missile. In general, you want to have more explosion velocity and less explosion radius, a faster, smaller explosion, or put another way, a short, tight explosion is more effective than a long, loose one. The amount of damage they actually do, however, varies with your target speed and signature size. Again, there are skills you can train to influence all these factors. I am not going to go into the whole rocket mechanics in this video. It would take me too long and I'm not confident about explaining it properly without getting everyone confused, including me. Suetonius Kestrel guides do well in explaining the mechanics, and I would also recommend reading the excellent Eve Uni guide on missile damage. I have linked both these in the description. The too long didn't read is that rockets apply their damage most effectively against bigger, slower ships, and less effectively against small, fast ships. Now, with this ship we will almost always be fighting frigates, in other words, smaller, faster ships. For this fit I carry the 4 variants of Tech 2 Rage rockets. These rockets deal the most damage, yet they are the slowest and therefore shortest range, have the lowest explosion velocity and highest explosion radius of all rocket types. Kind of the opposite of what I was just saying we need against small, fast ships. But this is where your dual webs come into play. Your Tech 2 dual webs are going to drastically slow your target down, which in turn is going to give your Tech 2 rockets the best chance of inflicting maximum pain. Let's get into some fights to demonstrate. First up is a fight against a Tristan. Tristans are very versatile ships and can be fitted out in a number of different ways. You can never really tell what's coming at you unless you've managed to get a look at the ship and pilot beforehand and maybe then do some Z-kill research on them, but even then it's an educated guess. Rightly or wrongly, with Tristans I always assume it's a kiting drone boat, so my priority is to get on it fast and switch off its micro warp drive. I have positioned myself near the warp-in beacon. All ships entering a faction warfare plex land near this beacon. By being close to this spot means that I won't have to cover a lot of ground in my slow Kestrel, and with luck I'll be able to snag him before he coasts too far on his initial micro warp drive speed and out of my scram range. I have Nova Rage rockets loaded against Gallente ships. He lands and I begin my approach. It turns out to be a neuting Tristan. This is a Tristan with 3 energy neutralizers in the high slots, which can swiftly drain your capacitor, leaving you dead in the water. When I see this, I quickly change my orbit to 7,500 meters in an attempt to move outside the range of the neutralizers. As you can see, my cap empties very quickly. However, rockets don't use any capacitor and are therefore unaffected by capacitor issues. Notice my prop, scram and webs have all been shut off, but my rockets are still firing. He could have probably warped off and maybe was trying in the end, but 1v1 frigate fights are so insane and fast that acting on battle information is easier said than done. In general, this fit is designed to be flown on the edge of scram range, so between 7.5 and 10 kilometers. However, this rule is regularly challenged depending on what is coming at you. Here is one example. I have a Tormentor on short range D-scan. This pretty much tells me he's coming for a fight. Tormentors are fit with lasers, usually beams, and they can pack a real punch. But beam lasers have poor tracking, so instead of orbiting at scram range, if I can get into a tight orbit, his lasers will have trouble tracking me and therefore hitting me with their full force. I have set my orbit at 1,000 meters with Nova Rage loaded against Amar frigates. As he lands, I kick on my preheated afterburner and start spamming the orbit command. Notice how this pilot pulls some distance before my webs kick in. He or she has done the right thing here by pulling range. I now have a 4,000 meter distance to cover and I'm already in armour. But watch my damage notifications as I close in and tighten the orbit to 500 meters. The lasers begin to apply less damage and there are a couple of misses. It is these actions that can make or break a fight. The dual webs really help here, not only in allowing me to catch him, but also in allowing me to achieve a higher transversal speed, wrecking the tracking of his lasers. If you haven't seen them already, my previous breakdown videos on the Atron cover some of the mechanics of different types of turrets, demonstrating the effect of orbiting distances and range against various weapon types. Against railguns, you want to be doing the same, orbiting tight. This next fight is an example of how I should have been doing this, but didn't. I see an Incursus sitting in a novice plex and warp to the gate. As I take the gate, I set my default orbit to 7,500 meters. I'm thinking this may be a blaster fit Incursus and therefore will want to fight him outside the range of his guns. It's hard to really know. Nova Rage is loaded. As I land, I start spamming the orbit command at 7,500 meters and we lock each other up. I should have realised much sooner that he was rail fit by the fact that he was still smacking me at 9 kilometers out, which would indicate rails. If he were blaster fit, I would be seeing misses as they are short range weapons. He was indeed rail fit. 125mm rails to be precise. You'll see I take a look at his ship to see what guns he has fitted, but by this stage it's too late really. I'm committed. Turning around and heading into his guns would be a bad idea, as I would more than likely take some heavy damage. The fight goes down to the wire. He's pretty tanky, but I just managed to hold on, winning the fight at 10% structure. Another good volley from his railguns would have finished me off. Had I been orbiting tight, I would have won the fight with a little more ease. I suppose the points I want to get across in these first few fights here is that fighting using the same technique against every ship isn't always the way to go, and becoming aware of what guns your opponent has fitted early in the fight is a great advantage. Let's take a look at another fight against our 125mm rail fit, where this time I quickly become aware of the type of guns he's using and adjust my orbit accordingly. Mjolnir Rage is loaded for Caldari ships. I have my default orbit set at 7,500 meters here and position myself at approximately that distance from the beacon. At this stage I'm hoping he's blaster fit, as many Merlins are. I spam the orbit command as I see him land and kick on my afterburner. Notice on the top left of my interface I have my combat logs and messages open. This is a good way to quickly receive information on what type of guns your opponent has. Within a second or so I am able to see he has 125mm rails fitted. With this knowledge I am able to quickly change my tactics. I begin closing the gap with the aim of getting into a tighter orbit of around 1000 meters to throw off the tracking from his railguns. Notice I don't go from 7500 meters straight to 1000 meters. This would allow his guns to get some damaging volleys because I'm effectively heading in a straight line to them. This is a dual web fit Merlin. You can tell this by rolling over the web icon above your HUD. So I decrease my orbit in increments to try and keep my transversal speed as high as possible, mitigating a lot of his damage. Watch the combat logs in the top left. You'll see his guns are only delivering grazes and glances and very little hits. There are some outright misses too. An opposite tactic needs to be deployed for blasters. Blasters are short-range weapons, and as such, when fighting blaster-fit ships, you want to be fighting outside their range, orbiting around 7.5 to 9 kilometers. I'm about to fight a blaster-fit Merlin here. I've loaded Mjolnir Rage and have started pulling range from the warp-in beacon. I have been practicing the look-at function recently as another tool to gauge the weapon type of my target. Pulling range like this allows me some time to get a glance at my opponent's ship and weapon setup. He lands some 20 kilometers away and I'm spamming the look-at button. It's a bit fiddly. I find when I'm looking at ships and they're moving, they keep pulling away from my camera and I constantly have to zoom into them using the mouse wheel. Perhaps it's something to do with my camera setup. I don't know, but it would be nice if I could set it up so the camera remains constant with the ship I'm looking at. If anyone knows anything about this, please tell me in the comments. Anyway, I catch a glimpse of his guns and see they're blasters. I kick in an orbit of 5000 meters and lock him up. As I slingshot past him, I adjust the orbit to 7500 meters and overheat my afterburner. Opening the combat messages confirms a blaster fit. Notice all those misses. I check if he's dual web by rolling over the web icon above the HUD. He isn't, and I'm able to dictate my range comfortably. I win the fight without even breaking shields. Looking quickly at AFT, we can see how this happened. On the left is the Merlin, on the right is my Kestrel. Notice the Merlin's speed is higher than mine initially, but when we apply the webs to each ship, you see the Kestrel comes out top in speed, meaning it will be able to dictate range. Opening the DPS graph, we can see the damage of the blasters has a very short range. With the constant misses my opponent was making, I'm guessing he may have been using Void or Navy antimatter ammo, which will just not reach to the 7.5 kilometer distance I was orbiting. If he had null loaded, which has a greater range, he would maybe have got more shots on target, but even so, at 7.5 kilometers the DPS with null is only 49. If you want to know more about AFT and its uses for comparing ship types against each other, I recommend watching my previous Atron videos. In these I go over AFT in more detail. Breachers are tough little ships, and I have died to a good many. They tend to be flown with dual active tanks, either two medium ancillary shield boosters or a shield booster and an ancillary armour repper, mounting a great active tank. They also have an annoying set of drones that add that extra DPS, but unlike the Kestrel, they do not have a bonus to missile range, so when up against a breacher you want to be orbiting at around 9 to 10 kilometers. At this range their rockets will just burn out, unable to make the distance. It is possible they might be using javelins, which are the Tech 2 long-range rockets. These can hit you at 10 kilometers plus, but do less damage. Load Inferno Rage for breachers. Mistakes were made in this fight, I think. I make a mistake by starting my orbit at 8 kilometers. As he lands, he burns straight for me, thus closing the gap and taking it longer for me to reach my 10-kilometer range. It turns out my opponent here is dual web fit. With his dual webs on me, I'm actually slower than him, but then he appears to burn away from me. As we're both moving away from each other, I'm able to reach my 10 kilometers quicker, and as I hit the 9-kilometer mark, you may be able to hear that his rockets are no longer hitting me. The fight was over much quicker than other fights I've had with breachers. Levon, if you're watching this, I'd love to get your take on the fight. When up against kiting ships such as this micro-warp drive missile fit Kandra coming in, it's imperative you get on them as quick as possible. I knew this guy was micro-warp drive fit as I had fought him earlier and lost, and I was hoping for a rematch. The Kestrel is very slow compared to other frigates, and Condors especially are very fast and can take off like rockets from a standing start. Fights like this will not always come out in your favour. For kiting ships, make sure you're sitting just off the beacon. Remember, this is where every ship lands when entering a faction warfare plex. I have my afterburner, webs and scram all preheated, thereby giving myself maximum speed output and maximum reach with my scram and webs. A good Condor pilot will be spamming his overheated micro-warp drive as he lands, in order to kick on his micro-warp drive to get a good burst of speed before he's locked up. What he wants to do is have enough speed built up that even when he's scrammed and webbed by his opponent, his ship continues to coast out of scram range, where he can then activate his micro-warp drive again. If I allow this to happen, the fight is over for me. I'll have very little hope in catching him. As soon as I see him on the overview, I start spamming approach and kick on my overheated afterburner. As I lock him up, watch his speed. He gets up to 3,500 meters per second before my scram and webs apply. This initial velocity carries him to almost 7.5 kilometers away from me, but thanks to my overheated Tech 2 scram, I have a scram range of just under 11 kilometers. So his micro-warp drive remains shut down, and my dual Tech 2 webs drag him quickly to a standstill. I was lucky and everything worked as I had planned. It doesn't always. The Federation Navy Comet, scourge of low-sec and faction warfare. Well, to me anyway. As a new pilot, I died to so many comets, and I still get my ass kicked by them. These ships are everywhere and for good reason. They are fast, tough, and with a 20% bonus to small hybrid turret damage, deliver serious pain if you're caught in their crosshairs. They tend to come in two variations, blaster fit and rail fit. Blaster comets can dish out 300 DPS and more. But, like all ships in Eve, they are still vulnerable, and with this Kestrel fit, I have killed more Navy comets than ever before. I like to imagine comet pilots have a special squeal as they die, since they think the comet is the instant win 1v1 frigate. When fighting a comet in this fit, the single most important thing to find out is what guns they have. When I see a Navy comet coming for me, the first thing I do is create some distance from it. If you are in a faction warfare plex, burn away from the warpin beacon. A 25 to 30 kilometer range is sufficient. My reasoning behind this is that, unless you know what guns they're fitted with beforehand, starting the fight at a closer range is going to result in you taking too much initial damage to outlast a comet's tank. You may eventually get to your optimal range, but by then it's too late, the damage is done. Pulling range like this allows you time to get a glance at your opponent's weapon setup, and therefore engage at the optimal range for the fight from the outset. I want to know if he's fit with blasters or rails, and depending on this information, will adjust my tactics accordingly. Use Nova rockets against Gallente ships. As soon as he lands, I select him in the overview and start spamming the lookout command. A quick glance at his guns and I see blasters. Good, my default orbit is already set to 8,000 meters. That's perfect, and I hit the orbit command and start burning towards him. Check out his speed. He's micro-warp drive fit and burning right for me. This is actually great. He'll be dead in the water once I get my scram on. I overheat my webs and scram and activate them as we slingshot past each other. Although not what I had planned, slingshotting him like this has benefited me. I shoot past him far enough to be positioned at my optimal range. With his micro-warp drive shut off and my dual webs on him, his speed has dropped to 89 meters per second. I'm most definitely in control of my range now. I close my orbit down to 7.5 kilometers, which was a mistake looking back on it. He's got null ammo loaded, which has a greater reach, and he gets a few good hits on me, taking me into armour. I should have just remained orbiting at 8 kilometers. I also overheated my mid slots far too long, resulting in my scram burning out. At this point he could warp out any time, but he didn't, and I got the kill. A worthy fight. Another blaster comet, this time afterburner fit. In my haste to check his guns and engage, I started recording this fight a little late. This time I get my orbit set at 10 kilometers to avoid the reach of any null ammo, but judging by his constant misses, I'm thinking he is either void or navy antimatter loaded, both of which are short range. I also notice his speed has dropped considerably. It looks like his AB has burnt out. I adjust my orbit to 7.5 kilometers. He's hull tanked and it's taking time to chew through it. I check the heat on my guns. Burning them out at this stage would make me rage inside. He pops. Another comet kill under my belt. I'm pretty happy with that. This next comet is real fit. I know this because I had managed to get a look at his fit beforehand. This is why I'm sitting at the beacon and haven't burned away as before. As he lands, I start spamming orbit at 1000 meters. Again, negligible speed on his part indicating a micro warp drive. I switch to an even tighter orbit. His extremely low velocity compared to my fast tight orbit pretty much negates all his turret damage as my transversal is just too fast. A surprisingly easy fight, but believe me when I say they are mostly not like this. Comets will almost always be tough, close fights and mistakes will be made, but don't be afraid of them in this fit. Skill into your ship and weapons and go out and practice. It really is the best way to learn and I'm still learning. That's basically it for this video. Thanks for watching and I hope you got something out of it. I recorded many more fights with this fit, both wins and losses, which I have put on a playlist and linked in the information below. Subscribe to my channel for future videos in the series. If you play your cards right, you can come away with a very satisfying kill or at least a great escape. I'll end with a final clip of a fight with a dual rep rail comet. Near the end of the fight I realise I'm not going to break his tank and make a dash for freedom, getting out in 3% structure. A butt clenching escape that we both could hardly believe happened. Great fun. Fly brave out there and I'll see you next time.